Fire her right now.
Funny, my own father said the same thing.
Mom. He never knew, did he?
Did you see that?
Yeah, buddy, I saw it.
Fire her, right now. The billionaire's voice cracked through the ballroom so sharply that even the string quartet faltered. Every head turned toward the young waitress standing frozen beside his table, a silver tray trembling in her hands. Grant Mercer, owner of the hotel, patron of the gala, one of the richest men in Boston, rose from his chair and pointed at her like she was something filthy on his floor. "If that girl is still employed here tomorrow," he said, "your manager can join her on the street." The room expected tears, begging, shame. But the waitress looked him in the eye, her face pale with something colder than fear, and said the one sentence that made his blood drain from his face. "Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 3 hours earlier, the Mercer House Grand Ballroom had glowed like a polished jewel. Crystal chandeliers hung over white linen tables. Men in tuxedos and women in gowns moved through the room with the relaxed confidence of people who had never checked their bank balance before buying groceries. Waitstaff in black uniforms floated between them, carrying champagne and plated salmon beneath the gold lettering of the annual Mercer Foundation Scholarship Gala. For most guests, it was a night of speeches and charity. For the staff, it was a night where one mistake could cost a job. "Keep your eyes open and your head down," the floor manager whispered as the team lined up in the service corridor. "Mr. Mercer notices everything." Everyone in the hotel knew who Grant Mercer was. At 51, he owned half the luxury hospitality market in New England. His name was on buildings, scholarships, and hospital wings. Newspapers called him brilliant. Employees called him exacting when they were being polite. When they were honest, they called him impossible. Tessa Reed adjusted the cuff of her borrowed uniform and said nothing. She had only been at Mercer House for 11 days. 2 weeks ago, she had been cleaning out her mother's apartment and arguing with debt collectors over hospital bills. Now she was working double shifts in a hotel that smelled like old money and polished marble while trying to keep rent paid and food in the apartment for her 12-year-old brother. She needed this job, more than anyone in that hallway knew. A nervous waiter beside her muttered, "Please don't let me get his table." Another answered, "He made Stephanie cry in front of 50 people last Christmas." The floor manager glanced down his seating chart and grimaced. "Table 1-2 is Mercer's. Need someone steady." Silence. No one volunteered. Then Tessa stepped forward. "I'll take it." 3 heads turned toward her at once. The manager frowned. "You sure?" She tied her apron tighter. "A customer's a customer." The waiter beside her gave a humorless laugh. "That one thinks he's God." Tessa's expression barely changed. "Then maybe someone should remind him he isn't." The waiter stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Across the ballroom, the double doors opened. Grant Mercer entered without fanfare, but the room shifted around him anyway. Tall, broad-shouldered, silver beginning to touch his dark hair at the temples, his tuxedo fit like it had been sewn onto him. He walked with the unhurried certainty of a man who had spent decades entering rooms where everyone else cared more about his opinion than their own. People smiled too quickly when he passed. They laughed a little harder at jokes near him. Tessa watched him approach his table and felt something sharp twist low in her stomach. So that was him, the man from old photographs, the man whose face had sat in a cardboard box under her mother's bed for 24 years. The man her mother had once loved enough to keep every memory of, even after life had taught her better. Grant sat, opened his phone, didn't look up. Tessa lifted her tray and walked toward him. Each step felt heavier than the last. "Good evening, sir," she said when she reached the table. "My name is Tessa. I'll be serving you tonight." Grant barely glanced at her. "Sparkling water, no lemon." She nodded. "Of course," she returned with the water. He ordered the halibut. No butter, no substitutions, no delays. His voice was clipped, impatient, mechanical. He never really looked at her, not once. The kitchen was chaos by the time the entrees came up. One server twisted an ankle near the pass, another dropped a tray. The sous chef shouted over a backed-up ticket line while the floor manager scrambled to reroute tables. Tessa, someone barked, shoving a tray toward her. Take Mercer's now. She glanced down. Wrong garnish, wrong plate set up. This isn't. Take it. There was no time. She carried it out, set it down carefully in front of Grant. Your halibut, sir. He looked at the plate, and the entire room changed. His jaw tightened. He set down his fork. What? He said quietly. Is this? Tessa's pulse kicked. Your entree, sir? No, he pushed the plate forward with one finger. This is not what I ordered. Nearby conversation softened, then stopped. Tessa looked at the dish. She knew immediately the kitchen had sent the wrong preparation. I'm sorry, sir, she said evenly. I'll have the kitchen correct it right away. Grant leaned back. That is not the point. She kept her voice calm. I understand, but the point, he cut in louder now, is that I fund this place. I expect competence, not excuses. The manager appeared at her shoulder in seconds, already sweating. Mr. Mercer will replace it immediately. Grant ignored him. His eyes stayed on Tessa. Are you new? Yes, sir. That explains it. The words drew nervous laughter from one of the donors nearby. Something inside Tessa went cold. She had worked since she was 16. She had watched her mother limp home after double shifts with swollen feet and cracked hands. She had watched women like her apologize for things that were not their fault because rich people mistook power for character. Tonight, maybe because she was tired, maybe because grief had burned too much fear out of her, she didn't lower her eyes. The kitchen plated the wrong order, she said. I delivered what was handed to me. The manager sucked in a breath. Grant's face hardened. Are you arguing with me? No, sir, she said. I'm telling you the truth. That was when he stood and pointed at her. Fire her right now. The room went still. The manager looked stricken. Sir, perhaps, if that girl is still employed here tomorrow, your manager can join her on the street. People stared, some with pity, some with discomfort. Most with the practiced silence of people who had learned it was safer not to defend those below them. Tessa felt every eye in the room on her. She should have stayed quiet. She should have swallowed it. She should have done what working people always did when powerful people humiliated them in public. But then Grant Mercer looked at her with that same dismissive expression her mother had once described in a trembling voice, the look of a man too certain the world would bend for him, and something inside her snapped. She stepped closer to the table. Her voice came out low, controlled, steady. My mother used to say you were very good at looking through people, she said. Grant froze. The color drained from his face so quickly it was visible. His eyes sharpened. What did you say? Tessa held his gaze. She said you never had trouble ignoring the people who had less than you. The ballroom had gone dead silent. Grant stared at her, not angry now, not exactly, more like a man hearing a voice he had buried decades ago. His lips parted. Who, he said quietly, is your mother? Tessa swallowed. For one terrible second her courage nearly failed her. Then she reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a worn photograph folded at the corners from years of being handled. She set it on the white tablecloth between them. Grant looked down. His entire body went rigid, because in that photograph, yellowed with age and cracked through the middle, stood a much younger version of himself on a summer dock, his arm around a smiling, dark-haired woman. And in blue ink across the back, barely visible from where he stood, was handwriting he had not seen in 25 years to Grant. Always. Love, Marin. Grant Mercer did not touch the photograph. For a long second, he only stared at it, his face drained of color, his hand still hovering over the white tablecloth as if one wrong movement might make the room tilt. Around him, the ballroom remained frozen. The donors at nearby tables had stopped pretending not to listen. The manager stood a few feet away, trapped between panic and confusion. Tessa watched the recognition hit him in pieces. First the dock, then the handwriting, then the name he had not heard spoken aloud in years. Marin, he said, so quietly she almost did not hear it. The manager blinked. Mr. Mercer? Grant did not answer him. His eyes stayed locked on the photograph. When he finally looked up at Tessa again, the anger was gone. In its place was something more dangerous, something unsteady. Where did you get this? Tessa let out a short breath through her nose. From my mother's things. The manager stepped closer, lowering his voice. Tessa, enough. Go to the back. No, Grant said. That single word stopped all movement around the table. He straightened slowly, aware now that half the room was watching. His voice came back harder, controlled again, but only on the surface. "Clear this area," he told the manager now. The manager hesitated for half a second, then nodded and began pushing staff away from the table. A donor at the next table rose as if to linger, but one of the hotel's security men appeared near the aisle and guided him elsewhere. The quartet resumed, weakly at first, as if trying to stitch the evening back together. Grant turned to Tessa. "Come with me." She did not move. "I said, come with me, and I'm supposed to trust that?" she asked. His jaw tightened. "I'm trying to understand what game you're playing." That word landed exactly as badly as it should have. For the first time since she had placed the photo down, real fury flashed across her face. "My mother is dead," she said. "I'm not playing anything." Grant held her stare. He looked like a man trying to force his mind into order and failing. 5 minutes, he said. "Private office. If you walk out before that, I won't stop you." Tessa studied him, then glanced toward the service corridor. She knew she should leave. She knew better than to follow rich men into quiet rooms when they were desperate to protect themselves. But she had not come here to run at the first crack in his composure. 5 minutes, she said. His office sat one floor above the ballroom, behind frosted glass and a locked hallway most staff never used. It smelled faintly of leather and cedar and the kind of expensive quiet that made ordinary people lower their voices without meaning to. Grant closed the door behind them, but he did not invite her to sit. He stayed on the other side of the desk. The photograph remained in his hand now. He had folded it back open carefully, almost reverently. That alone told Tessa more than his questions had. "Your name," he said. "Say it again." "Tessa Reed." He closed his eyes for one brief moment. "Reed," he repeated, like he was testing whether the sound belonged in this room. "How old are you?" 24. His fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. That did the math for him. She could see it happen. Not just the number, but the year, the summer, the silence that had followed. He looked at her with a sharper kind of focus now, the kind people used when they were trying to find proof in another person's face. Tessa hated that look. She had seen versions of it all her life when people were deciding whether her mother had told the truth about anything. "You said your mother was Marin," he said. "Marin Reed." "Yes." Grant moved around the desk and stopped by the window. The city lights beyond the glass looked cold and far away. "That's impossible." Tessa almost laughed. "Is that really where you're starting?" He turned back. She left. The certainty in his voice was thinner than he wanted it to be. Tessa crossed her arms. No, she didn't. Grant's expression hardened a little, not with confidence, but with habit. "I looked for her." "For how long?" He said nothing. That silence told her more than any answer could have. Tessa reached into her apron pocket again. This time she pulled out her phone, unlocked it, and scrolled for a few seconds before setting it on the desk between them. On the screen was a photograph of an old letter, the paper yellowed, the folds deep and worn from years in a box. Grant stepped closer. He read the first line. "Grant, I went to your family's house today." His face changed. Tessa's voice stayed steady, but it cost her something now. "My mother wrote that when she found out she was pregnant. She never mailed just one letter. She wrote several. She kept copies of 2, the rest were gone." Grant did not touch the phone. He read on. "Your mother refused to let me see you. Your father said if I came back again, he would handle it another way. I waited because I thought maybe you really didn't know." He looked up sharply. "No." It came out like a reflex, not denial of the letter. Denial of the possibility that his parents had known anything. Tessa held his gaze. That's what she thought too. At first. Grant took a step back from the desk. He looked like a man who had just discovered the floor under him was not where he remembered it being. "You expect me to believe this based on a photograph and a copied letter?" "No," Tessa said. "I expect you to believe it because you already do." The words hit harder than she intended. He ran a hand over his mouth and stared at the screen again. For the first time since she had entered his office, he seemed less like a billionaire and more like a man standing in the middle of a mistake too large to see all at once. Then he said the one thing that made her stomach tighten. "Did she ever tell you who your father was?" Tessa's face went still. "She told me enough," she said. "Enough to know she waited for someone who never came." Grant looked at her for a long moment. Then his eyes dropped to the name on the bottom of the letter, Marin. Slowly, like he was speaking to himself more than to her, he said, "Get me her file." Tessa frowned. What? He was already reaching for the desk phone, his face pale again, his voice suddenly clipped and cold in a different way. Human resources now. Tessa stared at him, not yet understanding what he was about to do. Then he lifted his eyes to hers and said, "If your mother was Marin Reed, I want every employment record you submitted to this hotel on my desk tonight." And before Tessa could answer, the office phone lit up with an incoming call from hotel security. The guard downstairs sounded rattled. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "there's a young boy in the lobby asking for Tessa. He says he's her brother, and he looks terrified." Tessa's entire body snapped toward the phone. "Noah?" The security guard answered before Grant could speak. "He says someone was pounding on your apartment door. He got scared and took the train here." Tessa was already moving. She shoved past Grant, yanked the office door open, and ran for the elevator with her apron still on. Grant followed half a step behind without thinking, his mind still fractured between the letter on his desk and the sudden fear in her voice. By the time they reached the lobby, the boy was standing near the security desk in oversized sneakers and a hoodie too thin for the March cold. His backpack hung from one shoulder. His face was pale, his eyes red around the edges from trying not to cry. The second he saw Tessa, he ran to her. She dropped to her knees and caught him hard. What happened? "There was a guy at the door," Noah said, breathless. "He kept banging and yelling about rent. Said if you didn't answer this week he was changing the locks. I got scared." Tessa closed her eyes for half a second. Grant stood a few feet away, watching. The child could not have been more than 12, skinny, tired-looking, too old in the face for his age. He clung to his sister with the instinctive panic of a kid who had learned early that adults did not always make things safe. Tessa brushed Noah's hair back. "You did the right thing, you hear me? You did exactly right." Noah nodded, then finally noticed the man standing nearby in the tuxedo. His expression changed at once. That was the man from the ballroom, the one who had humiliated his sister. He moved slightly in front of Tessa without even seeming aware he was doing it. Grant felt that small motion more sharply than he should have. "Who is he?" Noah asked. Tessa hesitated. "Too long." Grant answered for her, though his voice came out rougher than usual. "My name is Grant." Noah's eyes narrowed. "You're the jerk from downstairs." Tessa almost winced. Grant did not correct him. He looked at the boy, then at Tessa. "Your landlord threatened a minor alone in an apartment. He threatens whoever answers the door," she said flatly. "Welcome to Dorchester." Grant's jaw tightened. He was used to seeing numbers, eviction rates, housing reports, charity summaries placed in polished binders at board meetings. It was different hearing it in a lobby at nearly 11 at night, from a woman still in a waitress uniform with her frightened brother clinging to her coat. Tessa stood and adjusted Noah's backpack. "We're leaving. Wait." She turned. Grant glanced between her and the boy. "At least let my driver take you home." "No." "It's almost midnight." "No." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think I'm offering because I pity you. I think you're offering because you feel guilty." The words landed cleanly. He didn't deny them. Noah looked between them, confused but listening hard. Tessa exhaled. Her anger was still there, but beneath it was something heavier now. Exhaustion, fear. The constant grinding pressure of being the only adult in a life too big for one person. Grant saw it, and for the first time he understood that whatever this was, whatever truth sat waiting behind those letters, it was not something frozen in the past. It was still hurting people now. "At least let security walk you to the car," he said quietly. "Then hate me tomorrow." She stared at him, then nodded once. The drive to Dorchester passed mostly in silence. Grant rode in the front while Tessa and Noah sat in the back, separated from him by leather seats that cost more than their monthly rent. The contrast felt uglier now than it ever had before. When they reached the apartment building, the landlord was gone. The hallway smelled like bleach and old pipes. Paint peeled in strips near the mailboxes. One fluorescent light buzzed overhead, flickering every few seconds like it was tired too. Grant stood at the foot of the stairs and looked up. "No elevator?" Tessa gave him a look that made it clear she was not in the mood for rich man observations. Their apartment was on the 4th floor. Inside, it was exactly what he should have expected and somehow worse. Small, cold. Clean in the way poor homes often were, not because they were easy to maintain, but because dignity sometimes lived in the effort people made when they had very little else to control. A fold-out couch sat against one wall. Schoolbooks were stacked neatly on the table beside overdue utility notices. A cracked cabinet door hung slightly crooked above a sink full of rinsed dishes. There were no luxuries, no wasted space, no softness, only survival. Noah dropped his backpack and went straight to the kitchen counter where a half-finished homework sheet waited under a cereal bowl. Grant stood near the doorway and did not move farther in. Tessa noticed. "You can leave now." But his eyes had landed on the photographs taped beside the refrigerator. School pictures, birthday snapshots, one framed photo in the center. A dark-haired woman sat in a folding lawn chair outside what looked like a public park, laughing while a younger Tessa leaned against her shoulder. Marin, older than in the doc photo, tired around the eyes, still unmistakably her. Grant stared so long that Tessa's voice sharpened. "Don't," he looked at her, "don't stand there pretending to mourn someone you let disappear." The words hit because part of him believed he deserved them. "I didn't know," he said. "You stopped looking." His face hardened with the reflex of a man used to defending himself. "I searched. For how long?" she snapped. He said nothing. That silence answered everything. Tessa laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "Yeah, that's what I thought." Noah, sensing the shift in the room, quietly picked up his homework and disappeared into the bedroom without being asked. Grant watched the boy go. "He's your brother? Half-brother?" The answer was clipped. "His father? Gone before he was born." She folded her arms. "Seems my mother had a type." Grant flinched. He deserved that too. He looked around the apartment again, at the unpaid bills, the patched-up furniture, the life Marin had lived while he built towers and signed contracts and gave speeches about opportunity. His voice dropped lower. "She raised you here?" Tessa shook her head. "Not here. Different bad apartments. Same idea." Something in his chest tightened. Then his eyes landed on the small shelf near the television, a framed certificate. Mercer Foundation Academic Scholarship, awarded to Tessa Reed. Grant stepped toward it slowly. "What is this?" Tessa's expression changed when she saw where he was looking. "A scholarship," she said. "High school." He stared at the certificate. His own signature sat at the bottom. He remembered that year. The expansion initiative, the publicity campaign. He had signed hundreds. His throat went dry. "You got this from my foundation?" Tessa nodded once. A terrible understanding began to settle over him. He had paid for part of her education, had unknowingly sent money into his own daughter's life while never knowing she existed. The room seemed to tilt, and then Tessa walked to a small metal box on the shelf, opened it, and pulled out something folded with shaking fingers. When she turned back, she held out an old hospital document. "Here," she said. "You want more proof?" Grant took it. His eyes dropped to the date, then the hospital seal, then the line that made his heart stop. Father's name, withheld pending notification, and clipped behind it, a second page. A copy of a legal intake form from 24 years ago. Across the top, typed neatly in black ink, were the words, "Potential civil action against Mercer Estate. Interference, intimidation, and paternity suppression." Grant looked up, his face white. Tessa's eyes shone with old grief and fresh fury. "My mother was getting ready to sue your family," she said. And then something happened that made her stop. She took one breath. "And if you want to know what that was, you are going to hear the part your parents never told you." Grant stood motionless in the middle of Tessa's apartment, the legal form trembling slightly in his hand. The cheap overhead light buzzed above him. Somewhere in the building, pipes groaned through the walls. Noah's bedroom door clicked shut in the other room, and the ordinary sound of a child trying to disappear into safety made the paper in Grant's hand feel heavier than it should have. "What happened?" he asked quietly. Tessa looked at him for a long moment. Then she sat at the kitchen table and gestured for him to do the same. It was the first time all night she had invited him anywhere. He sat, not because he belonged there, because the story she was about to tell him required him to stay still and hear it. "My mother met with a legal aid attorney when I was 3, Tessa said. She was done waiting by then. Done hoping you'd wake up one day and come looking." Grant lowered his eyes. "She brought everything, letters, photos, witness statements from neighbors who knew she went to your parents' house. The lawyer thought she had a case, not for money, just for harassment and interference. She wanted your family forced to admit they'd threatened her. Grant swallowed. She wanted the truth on record. Tessa's mouth tightened. Then 2 weeks later, someone came to her apartment. His eyes lifted. A man in a suit. Never gave his name. Just told her that if she dragged the Mercer family through court, every newspaper in Boston would call her a liar trying to extort a rich man. He said she'd lose her job, lose her apartment, maybe lose custody if people started asking whether a woman living paycheck to paycheck could raise a child alone. Grant stared at her. No, she believed him. His voice sharpened. My family would not. Stop. Her tone cut clean through him. Stop defending people you haven't even bothered to question yet. Silence fell. She was right. That was the worst part. A long breath left his chest. Why didn't she tell you all this earlier? She did. Eventually. Tessa looked down at the table. But not when I was little. When I was little, she just said my father was someone who didn't know how to choose courage over comfort. The words hit him harder than accusation. He imagined Maren saying them, calmly, not to poison her daughter against him, just to answer a child's questions without lying too much. Grant stared at the apartment around him again, at the peeling paint, at the grocery coupons clipped neatly by the fridge, at the shoes by the door with cardboard tucked inside one sole to hold it together. Maren had lived like this, while he had been living in penthouses, flying private, complaining about bad wine and delayed flights. His throat tightened. How did she die? The question came out almost too soft to hear. Tessa looked at him for a moment before answering. Heart failure. Complications from a condition she should been treating years earlier. Grant's stomach dropped. She didn't have insurance? She had insurance. Tessa gave a humorless laugh. She also had deductibles, co-pays, missed shifts, rent, a son with therapy bills, and a landlord who raises prices every chance he gets. So she did what poor people do in this country. She waited too long. No accusation in her voice that time. Just fact that somehow made it worse. Grant looked down at the scholarship certificate still visible on the shelf. You said she stopped the lawsuit after the threat? Tessa nodded. She burned most of the paperwork after that. Said she was tired of fighting people who could ruin us without ever getting dirt on their hands. She paused. She kept only enough for me to know she wasn't crazy. Grant pressed his hand against his mouth. He remembered his father's style too well. Clean, quiet, never shouting when pressure would do, the kind of man who ruined lives politely. A sudden memory hit him hard enough to make him go still. He was 24 again, home from New York. His mother in the breakfast room, his father folding a newspaper. His mother saying almost casually, that girl finally stopped calling. At the time he had thought she meant some persistent fundraiser. He had not asked. The memory hollowed him out. Tessa saw something change in his face. What? He shook his head slowly. I think his voice faltered. I think there were signs. Things I didn't question because I didn't want to. Her expression did not soften. That's usually how people with comfort survive ugly truths. He should have bristled, should have defended himself, but she was right again. Noah's bedroom door cracked open slightly. The boy peeked out. Tess? Her whole posture changed instantly. Softer, warmer. Yeah, baby, you okay? She nodded. I'm okay. Noah looked at Grant for one long second before disappearing again. Grant watched that exchange and understood something in a way he had never understood it before. Tessa had not grown up waiting to be saved. She had grown up becoming the person who saved everyone else. His voice came rough. I should have been there. Tessa let out a bitter breath. Yes, you should have. No defense. No excuse. Just truth. He accepted it. For a while neither of them spoke. Then Grant said quietly, I want a DNA test. Tessa's eyes narrowed immediately. He raised a hand. Not because I don't believe what I'm seeing. Because if this goes any further, publicly, legally, privately, I want no room for doubt. Not for you. Not for me. She had studied him. That was practical. Realistic. Hard to argue with. Finally, she nodded once.
Fine.
Grant stood slowly, then stopped before reaching the door. There's something else, he said. She crossed her arms. What now? He hesitated. And for the first time that night, the billionaire who had humiliated her in front of hundreds of people looked uncertain. I want to help. Her laugh was immediate and sharp. No, Tessa, no. She stood too. You don't get to throw money at this because you feel guilty. It's not guilt. Your landlord threatened your brother. Your mother died under medical debt. You are working 2 jobs and raising a child that isn't yours. He is my brother. Grant nodded once, then your brother. But that doesn't change the fact that you shouldn't be carrying all this alone. Her eyes flashed. And my mother shouldn't have carried me alone. But here we are. That stopped him. She stepped closer, voice shaking now, not with fear but with years of pain finally spoken aloud. You don't get to become my father because you found out too late and feel terrible. Biology is not the same thing as showing up. Grant looked like she had struck him. Maybe she had. He gave one small nod. You're right. Then he opened the door and left. Tessa stood still for several seconds after he was gone. Then Noah came out quietly and wrapped his arms around her waist. Is he really my sister's dad? Tessa stared at the closed door. Her answer came slow. Maybe. Noah looked up. Do you want him to be? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Across town, Grant Mercer drove not to his penthouse, but to the old Mercer estate outside Brookline. The house where he had grown up. The house where his parents had built a family on polished floors and quiet lies. The butler looked stunned to see him at nearly 1 in the morning. Sir? Where's my mother? In the library, I believe. Grant was already moving. He found her there in silk robes with a glass of wine, seated beneath a portrait of his late father, looking exactly like the kind of woman who had never once doubted the world would arrange itself around her preferences. She looked up, surprised. Grant? What on earth? He dropped the old legal form onto the table in front of her. Her eyes lowered, and for the first time in his life, Grant watched his mother's face lose control. His voice came out low. Deadly, you knew. She stared at the paper, then slowly looked up at him, and said the one thing that told him everything. I did what I had to do to protect this family. Grant stared at his mother as if he had never seen her clearly before. The library around them felt smaller than it had in childhood. The dark wood shelves, the oil portraits, the smell of old money and polished leather. It had once felt like safety, now it felt like evidence. His mother set down her wineglass with careful hands. Do not look at me that way. How else should I look at you? Her chin lifted. Like the son who understands what it takes to preserve a family name. Grant let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, but there was no humor in it. You threatened a pregnant woman. I protected you. You destroyed her life. His mother stood. Watch your tone. No. He stepped closer. You don't get to ask for tone right now. For a moment something flashed in her eyes. Not shame, not remorse. Annoyance. The realization sickened him. She was trying to trap you, his mother said. A girl from nothing with a baby and a rich last name in sight. We had seen it before. Grant's face hardened. You knew her, you met her. She was beneath you. The words hit like a slap. He remembered Maren standing in the rain outside his dorm with library books in her arms. Remembered her laughing at his terrible cooking in their first apartment. Remembered the way she looked at him before ambition taught him to love success more than uncertainty. She loved me, he said. His mother gave a small, dismissive shrug. Then she should have known better than to get in the way of your future. The room went dead still. Grant felt something in himself crack. She had my child. His mother's expression did not move. And now, he said, voice low with disbelief, because of you, that child grew up in poverty while I built an empire never knowing she existed. She survived, didn't she? The cruelty of it was so casual that for one stunned second, he could not speak. Then he said the only honest thing left in him. You are not the person I thought you were. Her face cooled. And you are acting like a sentimental fool. He turned away from her before anger made him say something uglier. As he reached the door, her voice followed him. If you drag this family through scandal over some waitress with a story, do not expect me to stand beside you. Grant paused. Then he looked back over his shoulder. She is not some waitress. He left. The next morning felt unreal. Grant sat in a private clinic conference room across from a physician and a legal technician while a swab kit lay on the table between them. He had insisted on discretion, not because he was ashamed, because the truth deserved to arrive before the headlines did. Tessa sat across from him in plain jeans and a gray coat, her face unreadable. Noah waited outside with a social worker from his school, whom Tessa trusted enough to sit with him for 30 minutes. Even here she had not come alone. Grant noticed that. She trusted systems only when she had built backup plans inside them. The technician explained the procedure. Simple, standard, no drama, a swab from the inside of the cheek, paperwork, signatures. Grant almost laughed at the absurdity of it. 24 years of silence, reduced to cotton swabs and legal forms. When the technician stepped out, the room fell quiet. Tessa stared at the floor for a moment before speaking. My mother didn't want me to hate you. Grant looked up. She had every reason to. She said hate makes you build your life around someone who doesn't deserve that much space in your head. He swallowed hard. She told me you were young, ambitious, weak in the ways young men can be weak when rich families decide what matters. Tessa's voice stayed even but softer now. She never told me you were cruel. The distinction hurt more than if Marin had cursed him. Grant lowered his eyes. I wasn't cruel then. No, Tessa said. Just absent. The technician returned before he could answer. The swabs were taken. Results would take 48 hours. Outside the clinic, Grant reached for the door to hold it for Noah. The boy hesitated before stepping through. A small thing. But Grant noticed. Every tiny motion from that child felt loaded now. Noah looked up at him. Are you rich? Tessa groaned. Noah, what? The boy said. He has a driver. Grant surprised himself by answering honestly. Yes, I'm rich. Noah considered that. Then why didn't you help us before? The question came without accusation, just the brutal honesty children used when they had not yet learned to soften truth for adults. Grant had no answer, because none existed that did not sound pathetic. I didn't know about you, he said quietly. Noah frowned. Then why didn't you know? Again, no answer. Tessa stepped in gently. Come on. But the boy had already said what everyone else was too polite to. Why didn't you know? Why didn't you look harder? Why did comfort make ignorance so easy? That afternoon, Grant returned to Mercer House for the first time since the gala. The board was waiting. He barely sat before one of the directors slid a tablet across the table. Video footage. The confrontation in the ballroom. Already online, someone had posted it overnight. The caption read, Billionaire humiliates Waitress at charity gala. Millions of views. His PR chief spoke first. We need immediate damage control. Another board member added, the easiest path is termination. Publicly state the employee acted inappropriately after a service dispute. No. The room stilled. Grant's voice was flat. She will not be terminated. A board member frowned. Grant, with respect, the optics, he cut in, are that a man with too much power treated an employee like she was disposable. Silence. Then another voice, colder. This is about the girl, isn't it? Grant said nothing. That was answer enough. The room changed instantly. A woman near the end of the table leaned forward. If there is some personal entanglement here, you need to disclose it now before this becomes a corporate liability. Grant met her gaze. And for the first time in his professional life, the instinct to protect the company warred openly with the instinct to protect the truth. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. He glanced down. It was a screenshot of an old article draft, never published. The headline read, Mercer here secretly fathers child with hotel worker. Attached was one message beneath it. Your mother wasn't the only one who knew. Grant's blood went cold. He looked up slowly, because if that message was true, then his father had known too. And somewhere, buried in the history of his family's empire, there were even more lies waiting for him than he had imagined. Grant read the text 3 more times before he trusted that his eyes were not playing tricks on him. Your mother wasn't the only one who knew. He stood so abruptly that his chair scraped hard across the boardroom floor. Meeting adjourned. The directors began speaking at once. Grant, we're not finished. What exactly is going on? He ignored every voice in the room. By the time he reached the hallway, his assistant was already jogging behind him. Sir, who sent that? I want you tracing the number now. It may be spoofed, then try anyway. He kept walking. His mind had narrowed to one unbearable possibility, his father. If his father had known too, then the betrayal had not been one parent making a cruel decision. It had been both of them, a coordinated lie, an entire life stolen with deliberation. That night he went into the private records room beneath Mercer corporate headquarters. Very few people even knew it existed. It held decades of archived contracts, internal legal correspondence, and family business documents from before everything became digital. Grant had never cared much for the family archives, until now. An old records manager in his 60s blinked in surprise when Grant appeared after hours. "Mr. Mercer? I need all correspondence flagged under legal threat management, reputation risk, or personal settlements involving the Mercer family between 23 and 25 years ago." The man hesitated. "That's extensive." Grant's stare hardened, then start pulling. 3 hours later, Grant sat alone at a long archive table with sleeves rolled to his forearms, surrounded by bankers' boxes and yellowing folders. Most contained exactly what he expected. Corporate disputes, settlements, routine ugly things wealthy families buried with lawyers. Then he found one marked only with initials, MR. His chest tightened. He opened it. Inside was a thin file. Too thin for how much damage it had done. At the top sat a private investigator's report confirming surveillance of Maren Reed. Address verification, employment records, pregnancy confirmation, witness statement noting she had attempted contact with Grant Mercer multiple times. Below that, a draft non-disclosure agreement offering her money in exchange for permanent silence. Grant stared at it so long his vision blurred, and under that, a typed internal memo from his father's attorney. Miss Reed remains unwilling to cooperate. Further pressure may be required if litigation threat persists. Grant's hands began to shake. There it was, cold, clinical, documented. His parents had not simply known, they had planned, organized, managed. Like Maren had been a business problem, he turned the final page and stopped breathing. Stapled behind the memo was a returned envelope addressed in Maren's handwriting to Grant Mercer. The postmark was 24 years old, across the front stamped in red, Intercept. Grant sat frozen, then very slowly lowered himself into the chair because his legs no longer trusted him. They had taken her letters, his mother, his father. They had physically intercepted letters addressed to him. Every hope she mailed, every plea, every chance he had to know. Gone. He stared at the envelope until the room around him blurred. Then he did something he had not done since he was 19 years old. He cried. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a man alone in a basement archive room, bent over decades-old paper, grieving a life he had never been allowed to live and hating himself for how easily he had accepted the silence. By morning, he drove straight to Tessa's apartment. She opened the door in sweatpants, clearly not expecting him. One look at his face and her posture changed. "What happened?" Grant held out the envelope. She frowned and took it. Her eyes moved over the front, then widened. For a moment she said nothing. Then very softly, "Where did you get this?" "In my father's records." She looked up. He could barely meet her eyes. They took her letters. The apartment went silent. Noah looked up from the table where he was eating cereal, sensing immediately that something serious had entered the room. Tessa stared at the envelope again, then at him. Then something in her face cracked. Not anger, not exactly, a deeper hurt. The kind that comes when a wound you already knew was real gets confirmed in writing. "She waited by the mailbox every day for weeks," Tessa said quietly. "She told me that once. Said part of her kept thinking maybe you just needed time." Grant closed his eyes. "She mailed them," he said. "She really mailed them." Tessa gave a small broken laugh. "Yeah, she did." Noah looked between them. "What letters?" Neither answered immediately. Then Tessa knelt beside him. "They were letters Mom wrote a long time ago," she said gently. "To someone who should've gotten them." Noah's eyes shifted to Grant. Understanding flickered there in pieces. Then he asked the question no one wanted. "So this is really happening?" Grant looked at him. "Yes," he said quietly. "I think it is." The boy absorbed that with the solemn seriousness children had when life forced them to process adult things too early. Then Noah asked, "Are you gonna disappear again?" The question hit the room like shattered glass. Tessa went still. Grant's throat tightened. "No," he said. Noah frowned. "Lots of grown-ups say stuff they don't mean." Grant nodded once. "You're right." He crouched to the boy's level. "I can't fix what I missed. And I can't ask either of you to trust me because of one answer on a test or one bad night. But I can promise I'm not leaving because this got uncomfortable." Noah studied him, then nodded once, cautiously. It was not trust, but it was not rejection either. Grant stood again. "I need to do something today," he said. Tessa's eyes narrowed. "What?" He met her gaze. "I'm going public." Her expression changed instantly. "What?" "I humiliated you publicly. The truth comes out publicly." She stared at him like he had lost his mind. "You realize what happens if you do that? Reporters, Lawyers, headlines, people digging through my mother's life like she's gossip. They already will if this leaks another way. And you think I want cameras outside this apartment, he faltered. Because that part he had not fully considered. Tessa stepped closer. This is my life, Grant, not a press strategy. The use of his first name instead of anything softer drove the point home. He nodded slowly. You're right, she folded her arms. You don't get to decide what justice looks like by yourself. He took that in. Then asked, more carefully, then tell me what you want. The question stunned her enough that she did not answer immediately. He went on. What would make this right? Not fixed. I know that's impossible, but right. Tessa's eyes shone with conflict. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. I want people to know my mother told the truth. Grant nodded once. That's fair. No, her voice sharpened. It's not fair. Fair would have been her not dying with everyone thinking she was some delusional woman who made up a rich boyfriend. The pain in that sentence hung between them. Grant swallowed hard. Then his phone buzzed. A message from the clinic. DNA results ready. He looked at the screen, then at Tessa, and for one suspended second, both of them understood the weight of what waited in that unopened file. If the truth inside matched everything their hearts already feared, there would be no more room left for denial. Grant did not open the DNA results alone. An hour later, he and Tessa sat across from each other in the same clinic office where the swabs had been taken. Noah waited in the hallway with headphones on, swinging his legs under a plastic chair while pretending not to listen. The doctor slid the sealed envelope across the desk. Grant looked at it, then at Tessa. Neither moved at first. Finally, she said, "Open it." His hands were steadier than he felt. Then lowered the page. Slow probability of paternity, 99%. For a moment, no one spoke. The words did not surprise him. They shattered him anyway. Grant looked up at Tessa, his eyes wet before he could stop them. "You're my daughter." The sentence came out broken. Tessa's face tightened hard, like every muscle in it was fighting not to collapse under the weight of hearing aloud what she had known in pieces her whole life. "Yes," she whispered. He lowered his head. 24 years, gone. First steps, first day of school, broken hearts, graduation, every fever, every birthday, every ordinary little moment fathers were supposed to show up for, gone. Because while he had not chosen the lie, he had lived inside it, benefited from it, built a life large enough that he never had to notice what was missing. The doctor quietly excused herself. When the door shut, silence swallowed the room. Grant's voice came low and raw. "I don't know what to say." Tessa laughed softly through tears she refused to wipe away. "That makes two of us." Outside, Noah's muffled voice came through the door. "Are we done yet?" Tessa let out a breath that almost became a laugh. Grant stood and opened the door. Noah looked up immediately. "Well?" Grant knelt in front of him. The boy stared at his face, reading the answer before he heard it. Grant said softly, "Looks like I'm really stuck with you now." Noah frowned, then smiled before he could stop himself. It was small, quick, gone almost instantly, but Grant saw it, and something in his chest ached in a way money had never touched. 3 days later, the story broke. Not because Grant lost control of it, because he refused to hide it. He stood at a press conference inside Mercer House with cameras lined wall to wall and reporters pressing shoulder to shoulder. The same ballroom where he had humiliated Tessa had been transformed into something else entirely, a reckoning. Grant stepped to the podium alone, no PR script, no legal spin, just truth. "My name is Grant Mercer," he said into the microphones, "and a week ago I publicly mistreated an employee at this hotel. That woman is Tessa Reed. She is also my daughter." The room exploded, questions shouted from every direction. Flashes lit the stage. Grant raised a hand. "For over 2 decades, I was kept from knowing she existed. My family interfered with communication between her mother and me. They threatened a woman who deserved dignity and treated her like a problem to erase. That woman, Marin Reed, raised our daughter alone. She died before I knew the truth." He swallowed hard. "For the shame of that belongs to my family, not to her." Across the room, Tessa stood near the side entrance with Noah beside her. She had not wanted to come, but when Grant asked if she would be willing to stand there, not for him but for her mother, she had said yes. Reporters turned toward her in waves. Grant continued. "Effective immediately, I am resigning as acting chairman of the Mercer Family Foundation pending board review, and I am launching an independent audit into all prior family-controlled legal and financial actions related to this matter. I will also establish the Marin Reed Justice Scholarship for single parents pursuing education while raising children alone. The room erupted again. It was not enough. He knew that. Nothing would ever be enough. But truth had finally entered the room where lies once lived comfortably. That night, the internet did what it always did. Half the world praised him, half condemned him for taking too long. Some called it brave, others called it damage control. Tessa read none of it. She sat at the kitchen table while Noah did homework nearby, staring at the old photo of her mother on the fridge. Grant knocked once before entering. He had started doing that, even when the door was unlocked. A small sign that he understood boundaries here were earned, not assumed. He held a grocery bag in one hand. Tessa frowned. What's that? Food, she stared. Why? He looked genuinely confused. Because Noah said you were out of cereal. Noah perked up from the table. You got the cinnamon one? Grant held up the box. The boy grinned. It was such a normal moment that Tessa did not know what to do with it. Grant set the groceries down on the counter awkwardly, like a man who had never in his life carried his own shopping bags. Noah immediately started unpacking them. You got the wrong peanut butter, he announced. Grant blinked. There are different kinds. Tessa made a sound halfway between a laugh and disbelief. For one brief second the room felt lighter, real, not healed, not fixed, just human. Grant turned toward her after Noah wandered off with the cereal. I spoke to the landlord. Her expression hardened. Grant, I didn't buy the building. She narrowed her eyes. That was too specific to not have been your first thought. He almost smiled. I had the housing authority inspect it instead. Multiple code violations. He'll be tied up for months. Tessa stared at him. That was not money. That was understanding. That was using power differently. Her face softened before she caught it. Grant noticed, and said nothing. He had begun learning that not every softening needed to be chased. He moved toward the door, then stopped. There's something else. Her stomach tightened. My mother is contesting everything, he said quietly, publicly. She's calling you a liar, saying you manipulated me for money. The warmth in the room vanished. Tessa went still. Grant's face hardened. She's requested a formal board hearing tomorrow to challenge my authority and declare me mentally compromised for bringing scandal onto the company. Noah looked up from the cereal box, confused. Tessa's voice dropped. She's trying to remove you. Grant nodded. And if she succeeds, he said, she takes back control of everything. He met Tessa's eyes. She thinks you'll disappear if she destroys my credibility. Tessa stood slowly. The old hurt in her face was gone now, replaced by something steadier, more dangerous. Then maybe, she said, it's time your mother heard from the daughter she tried to erase. The Mercer board hearing was held in the same glass-walled conference room where Grant had signed billion-dollar acquisitions and watched men twice his age defer to his judgment. This time, the room felt different, hostile. Every seat at the long walnut table was filled. Attorneys lined one wall. Senior executives sat rigid with their folders open. Outside the glass, assistants pretended not to watch. Grant entered first, then Tessa. A murmur moved through the room the second people saw her. His mother was already seated at the far end of the table in ivory silk and diamonds, looking composed enough to host a charity luncheon instead of a corporate coup. She glanced at Tessa only once, and the disdain in that single look told Tessa everything she needed to know. No remorse, no regret. Only irritation that the problem had learned to walk into the room on its own. The board chair cleared his throat. We are here to address concerns regarding Mr. Mercer's recent conduct, public disclosures, and leadership capacity. Grant sat. Tessa remained standing beside him. His mother spoke first. My son is acting from emotional instability, she said smoothly. He has been manipulated by a disgruntled employee making opportunistic claims tied to an old youthful relationship. This entire spectacle has endangered the company, our shareholders, and the Mercer name. Tessa almost laughed. The woman said it like she was discussing weather. Grant's hands clenched under the table, but before he could speak, Tessa stepped forward. Say that again. The room went still. The board chair frowned. Miss Reed, this is not. No, Tessa said without taking her eyes off Evelyn Mercer. If she wants to call my mother a liar to my face, let her do it clearly. Grant's mother lifted her chin. Your mother made choices, she said coolly, bad ones. I will not apologize for protecting my son from a mistake that would have ruined his future. Grant stood so fast his chair rolled backward, but Tessa lifted one hand slightly. Let me. He froze. Tessa took another step towards the table. My mother worked 2 jobs while raising me alone because you were afraid your son might marry someone poor. Her voice stayed calm, which somehow made every word sharper. She skipped medication because medical bills mattered more than pain. She died in a rented apartment with overdue notices in the kitchen because your family decided her life was worth less than your reputation. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. One woman near the middle lowered her eyes. But Evelyn Mercer did not flinch. Dramatic storytelling changes nothing, she said. My responsibility was to my family. Tessa's expression hardened. No, your responsibility was to basic human decency. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Grant watched the board. Some looked shaken. Some embarrassed. Some angry not at Evelyn, but at the fact that they were being forced to confront what wealth often hid so well. Cruelty dressed up as respectability. Then Grant reached into his briefcase and placed the intercepted envelope on the table. Then the investigator's report, then the attorney memo, then the private NDA draft, one by one, paper after paper, truth in black ink. His voice came low and cold. You threatened a pregnant woman, you intercepted her letters, you hired investigators to monitor her. You buried it all in company legal records under risk management. His mother's face changed for the first time. Not guilt, fear, because now it was documented, verified, unspinnable. A board member at the far end whispered, Jesus Christ. Another looked at Evelyn with naked disgust. She straightened. You have no idea what pressure your father and I were under. Grant cut her off. No, you have no idea what pressure she was under. He pointed at Tessa. She buried her mother without knowing if the man who fathered her even cared she existed. She raised her brother while working hotel shifts in a building I owned. She stood in a ballroom while I humiliated her in front of hundreds of people because I had become exactly the kind of man your values created. The room was silent. Grant's voice cracked on the next words. That ends now. He turned to the board. If this company removes me for telling the truth, then remove me. But if you keep her in any position of influence after what is sitting on this table, then every person in this room is saying reputation matters more than what she did. No one spoke. Not for a long time. Then the board chair looked at Evelyn. Mrs. Mercer, pending full review, your advisory privileges and voting influence are suspended effective immediately. She stared at him. You cannot be serious. A second board member spoke. We should have known none of this. That alone is disqualifying. A third added quietly, My God, Evelyn. For the first time in her life, it seemed no room bent around her. She stood slowly, looking at Grant with something colder than anger. You would destroy your own mother for this girl? Grant met her gaze. No, he said. You destroyed yourself for appearances. I'm just refusing to help hide it. She left without another word, the door shut behind her. And just like that, the most feared woman in Grant's childhood was gone from the room. The hearing ended minutes later. Outside in the hallway, reporters had already gathered. Someone had leaked that the board meeting involved the Mercer scandal. Flashes exploded the second the doors opened. Mr. Mercer, is it true your mother concealed your child? Miss Reed, did the Mercer family threaten your mother? Will there be criminal charges? Security moved quickly, but before they reached the elevator, Tessa stopped. Grant turned. What are you doing? She looked at the cameras, then at him, then stepped to the microphones herself. The hallway fell quiet. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. My mother's name was Maren Reed, she said. She was not a liar. She was not a gold digger. She was not unstable. She was a hard-working single mother who loved her children and spent her life being punished for telling the truth. Reporters scribbled furiously. Tessa swallowed. She deserved better than to die with people whispering behind her back. So if anyone remembers her name after today, remember that. Her eyes glistened. Remember that she told the truth when no one powerful wanted to hear it. The silence afterward was absolute. Then the shouting resumed. Security rushed them through, but in the elevator down, Grant looked at Tessa differently than he ever had before. Not as the daughter he had lost, not as the woman he had wronged, but as someone stronger than almost anyone he had ever known. When they reached the parking garage, Noah was waiting in the back seat of Grant's car with the driver swinging his legs. He looked up as they approached. "Well?" he asked. Tessa smiled through tears. "I think Grandma got fired." Noah burst out laughed, a real one, brief, human. Then his phone buzzed. He checked the screen. His face changed instantly. Tessa noticed. "What?" Grant looked up slowly. "It's the hospital." Her stomach dropped. "Why are they calling you?" His voice came tight. "Because your mother listed me once." Tessa froze. He stared at the screen, then at her. "There's something in storage they say belongs to next of kin." He swallowed. "They found a sealed box Marin left behind with instructions to release it only if I was ever identified." The box was smaller than Tessa expected. Plain cardboard, hospital tape still sealing the edges. Her mother's handwriting sat across the top in neat blue ink. "For Grant Mercer. Only if he ever learns the truth." No one spoke as they carried it into Tessa's apartment. Noah sat cross-legged on the couch, suddenly quieter than usual. Grant stood near the kitchen table like he was afraid touching anything too quickly might break the moment. Tessa stared at the box for several seconds before sliding a finger beneath the tape. Inside were three things: a stack of letters tied with ribbon, a small velvet jewelry box, and a sealed envelope with Grant's name on the front. His hands shook when he picked it up. He opened it carefully and read, "Grant, if you are reading this, then somehow the truth finally reached you. First, if you did not know about Tessa, then I was right about you. You were many things when we were young, proud, restless, too eager to prove yourself. But you were never cruel enough to abandon your child if you knew she existed. For that, I am sorry." Grant stopped reading for a second because his vision blurred. He swallowed and continued. "I spent years angry, then years tired, then years simply trying to survive. By the time I realized you may never know the truth, I had children to raise and too little energy left for hate. If life has brought this to you at last, I ask only one thing. Do not love her out of guilt. Do not try to buy back lost years with money. If you choose to be in her life, show up. Again and again. Even when it is awkward, even when she makes it difficult, even when you realize love from a distance is much easier than earning trust up close, because children do not need perfect parents, they need parents who stay." By the time Grant reached the end, his voice had broken completely. Silence filled the apartment. Then Tessa quietly wiped her eyes and opened the velvet box. Inside lay a simple silver necklace, the one from the photograph. Her mother had kept it all those years. Noah whispered, "Mom saved that for him?" Tessa nodded, unable to speak. Grant stared at the necklace like it had been pulled from another life. Then he sank into the nearest chair and cried without trying to hide it. No one looked away, because sometimes grief was not something to conceal. Sometimes it was the only honest thing left. Weeks passed. The scandal did not disappear. Mercer family lawyers circled. Reporters kept digging. Evelyn Mercer retreated from public life after multiple board members formally cut ties with her. Civil investigations opened into old legal practices tied to the family office. The empire did not collapse, but it changed. And so did Grant. He did not buy Tessa a penthouse. He did not force his way into her life with grand gestures. He came on Tuesdays to help Noah with math even when Noah rolled his eyes and said he explained fractions like a robot. He showed up on Thursdays with groceries and learned the correct peanut butter after 3 failed attempts. He sat in folding chairs at Noah's school recital beside exhausted parents in work uniforms and never once acted like he belonged anywhere else. He listened when Tessa snapped at him. He stayed when she pulled away. He apologized more than once and never demanded forgiveness in return. One rainy Sunday, months later, Tessa stood in the kitchen watching through the apartment window as Grant helped Noah learn to ride a second-hand bike in the parking lot below. The boy kept wobbling, kept shouting. Grant jogged beside him in dress shoes, soaked through and laughing despite himself. Then Noah finally caught balance, rode 10 feet alone, turned back, grinning wildly. "Did you see that?" Grant's face lit up with something raw and boyish and unguarded. "I saw it." Tessa stood very still. Because there it was, one of those ordinary little moments her mother had written about. The kind of moment fathers were supposed to be there for. Late, painfully late, but here. Grant came upstairs dripping wet and smiling, still arguing with Noah about helmet safety. He stopped when he saw Tessa watching him. Something passed between them. Not magic, not instant healing. Just the quiet recognition that some broken things could not be undone, but they could still become something honest. She stepped toward him, and for the first time in her life, she said the word that had lived in her chest for 24 years with nowhere safe to go. Dad. Grant froze, then his eyes filled instantly. He did not move at first, like he was afraid breathing too hard might ruin it. Then Tessa let herself smile. Small. Real. You should probably get used to hearing it, she said softly. If you keep showing up. He laughed through tears. I plan to. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows of the little apartment where Maren Reed had once raised her children alone. Inside, the people she loved most stood together at last. Not because the past had been erased. Not because pain had disappeared. But because the truth had finally been spoken, and because even late love, when it is real, can still change the shape of a life. If this story moved you, feel free to share where it touched you most, and stay with us for the next story waiting to be told.